even if Queen Charlotte had African ancestry, however distant, would that make her Black? Historian Hilton adds that even if it were the case, after 500 years, it's extremely unlikely that traces of the genetic makeup would have appeared in the features of Queen Charlotte, Hilton added. Well, I have to stop there and say, I don't think that's true. I think that if Queen Charlotte does have this African ancestry, that stuff can pop up at any time. Hi, I'm Danielle Romero, and thank you so much for joining me today on my channel, where I've been digging into my family's hidden heritage and ancestry from Louisiana. And digging into that has raised so many questions alongside the answers. So I kind of dig into all things genealogy, history, and kind of the cultural conversations about race in America. Today, want to dig into a topic that I actually saw come up a lot in comments on across different videos. And it was this idea that Queen Charlotte of England was part Black. TV shows like Bridgerton and the upcoming Netflix spinoff have gained popularity for their portrayal of Queen Charlotte as a Black monarch. Now, the portrayal is based on a theory that was popularized by a historian who asserted that Queen Charlotte was biracial. However, other scholars are really skeptical of this theory and they point to a bunch of inconsistencies in this claim. Well, this totally piqued my interest because it's like right up my alley. Queen Charlotte in Bridgerton is not like a historically accurate show to begin with, right? The girl Golda, who plays Queen Charlotte, is very commanding on the screen with her towering wigs and the lavish gowns, and she actually stands out for her role as a Black monarch reigning over this reimagined, racially integrated London. Was Queen Charlotte part Black? Now, the real Regency era, which was from 1811 to 1820 in England, was nowhere near as diverse as the show imagines it to be. Slavery wasn't abolished in England until 1833, and people of color were still relegated to a lot of domestic work even after that. Now, Bridgerton leans into this one historian's theory that Queen Charlotte was descended from a Black branch of the Portuguese royal family. But other scholars have totally disputed this, and so there's no reason to believe this. A historian named Lisa Hilton said, quote, "The problem with the theory is that it's been knocking around on the internet, reported on by the likes of the New York Times, and it's gained a veneer of respectability," she said. But one can say there's absolutely no credible evidence that she was Black. Princess Charlotte, as I've learned, was born into the royal family in a small duchy in Germany. As a minor German princess with a major sway in politics, she was deemed a suitable match for George III, who inherited the British throne in 1760. Within 6 hours of her arrival in London in September of 1761, Charlotte married King George III, becoming the Queen of Great Britain. Now, the new queen initially spoke New English, but she learned the language and acclimated to British society, earning the approval of her subjects. Historian Hilton goes on to say, quote, "She was quite popular at the time, a good, pious Protestant woman who had a successful marriage with King George." Now, when King George's mental and physical wellness kind of deteriorated in 1788, Queen Charlotte stepped up to effectively govern. And though she was never formally appointed, says until her death in 1818. So the theory that Queen Charlotte was a biracial woman is fascinating to me, especially with all of the spiciness around this idea of Meghan Markle kind of breaking this barrier into the monarchy as a woman of color. So the theory that Queen Charlotte was biracial actually, from what I can tell, emerged only in 1997, which seems that's not what I was expecting. I was expecting that this was this long drawn out wild goose chase. But 1997, I don't even know if I can say this guy's name, Mario del Valdes y Cocam, who described himself as, quote, a historian of the African diaspora. He posited that, quote, at least 42 lines of descent can be traced from Queen Charlotte to the illegitimate son of King Alfonso of Portugal and his Moorish mistress. Pinned this argument on what he perceived as, quote, subtleties in coloring and facial bone structure of individuals of African descent, pointing to a portrait by the official royal painter Alan Ramsey. But other historians have argued that Cocam's theory is inconclusive. Other people have said that the idea that Queen Charlotte was part Moorish was totally unfounded, and it was not a term that even necessarily referred to someone of African descent. Instead, it was a general term used for inhabitants who were Black or white or otherwise of the Moorish Empire of North Africa and Spain. Additionally, a lot of people's genealogical research that I'm seeing has shown there's really no concrete evidence linking Queen Charlotte to any African ancestry. Many members of the European royalty and nobility intermarried, and so far it seems that her line really only goes to European descent, nobody of African descent. Historian Hilton adds that even if it were the case, after 500 years, it's extremely unlikely that traces of the genetic makeup would have appeared in the features of Queen Charlotte, Hilton added. Well, I have to stop there and say, I don't think that's true. I think that if Queen Charlotte does have this African ancestry, that stuff can pop up at any time. I feel like my family is a good example of that, where there are people who favor one side more than the other, and then all of a sudden someone comes out with a face that you're like, okay, this is definitely from that side of the family. So I don't think necessarily that you could say, well, even if it was true, you wouldn't see it. I think the question is really, well, is it true? There are many portraits of Queen Charlotte that were commissioned during her reign, and they don't portray her with distinct African features. But despite the lack of evidence that a lot of historians are pointing to for this theory, the portrayal of Queen Charlotte as a Black monarch in Bridgerton and its spinoff, I think, do spark really important discussions about, the way we see the way historical figures are represented on screen. While Bridgerton and its spinoff may depict Queen Charlotte as a Black monarch based on a theory that was popularized by this historian, I haven't really seen any concrete evidence to say one way or the other. But the historian suggests that the way Queen Charlotte is depicted in Ramsay's 1762 portrait supports the view that Queen Charlotte did have African ancestors and that those features are clearly visible in this painting. Now, is it possible that other portraits of Queen Charlotte had those African features softened to make her more palatable to the general British public at the time? I really have no idea. Now, Valdez, who is the historian who is claiming that Queen Charlotte has this African lineage, has argued that people like Heather Locklear, the Medicis, and even the Vanderbilts have African ancestry. So he has, all kinds of theories about this hidden Black heritage of famous families and famous people. What's the bearing? Well, the suggestion that Queen Charlotte was, quote, Black implies that her granddaughter, who is Queen Victoria, and her great-great-great-great-granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II, had African forebears. So, I don't know. And maybe it makes things just a little bit more interesting. Now, the question is, even if Queen Charlotte had African ancestry, however distant, would that make her Black? But I think that if you've been around on my channel for any amount of time, you know that I don't have an answer to that. So what do you think? Do you think Queen Charlotte was of African descent? Is this the first time you've ever heard of it? And have you watched the show Bridgerton? Let me know what you think.